Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com. Promo code STAPLE20.
Gas mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna cook a meal that's gonna make you mine. We're turning up the oven, now we're ready to roast. When you taste me, honey, you'll love it the most. Come on and put me in a loving stew.
Welcome to another Britflix.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is Richard Holmes of Big Rich Films and VOX BOX. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I came across you at a masterclass event a long while ago. You were talking about how to make £1 million or how to make a film under £1 million, and you used the movie you produced, Eden Lake, as like a case study, I think, if I remember rightly.
I hope I didn't, because that certainly was a little bit more than £1 million. It wasn't a lot more, but I think it was about 2.
Okay, well, but my memory of you talking about Eden Lake then on that was about continuity, and it always stuck with me every time I rewatch it, because you cited an example where people are going, well, it's not the right foliage. It's not the right foliage. And you're going, we're in the woods.
I got into real trouble for this on another film, which I'll talk to you about. But on that, it got so intense. And I did say, a tree is a fucking tree is a fucking tree. Because I said, if they're looking at the leaves while some kid's being burned, we've lost them completely. Anyway, I used that adage to try and get another job on a film, which I did manage to secure, called The Ritual, where I was a producer for hire.
Okay.
And it was, I've seen it. It's a really well-made horror film, but it's in the woods.
Saw it at the cinema.
Oh, very nice. Thank you very much. And, I did say to the director, a tree is fucking, as a kind of like, ha, ha, ha. And he, a really nice guy who I still am very, very fond of, David Bruckner, he just kind of like he just pursed his lips slightly. And actually, he used trees in a completely different way. So I should have just bitten my lip.
Yeah.
He used trees as sort of mood. And I'm not a director. And but once he explained to me what he needed and why, I was much more sympathetic to his desire to find the right kind of leaf than I was in the middle of the blood and guts of Eden Lake. But yeah, there is a certain pragmatism to filmmaking. Occasionally, you just got to realize that the audience isn't going to be looking at that.
Yeah. I think it was Ridley Scott said something along the lines of, somebody said we can see a reflection in a wheel hub or something. He said if the audience are noticing a reflection in a wheel hub, we've lost them.
Yes, but the beauty of today's filmmaking is that if there's a reflection in the wheel hub, we will actually take it out in post.
Fix it in post.
It's true. You can get rid of all those things. I remember that when I first used digital, I made a film called Resistance, which is set in the Second World War in Wales.
Yeah, and
we were, you try and see Russia's on the big screen as much as you can, but it was the first sort of digital thing I'd done properly. And I remember being in the final grade, and it was a big wide, and the grader went, "Someone's having a sandwich in a car." about a quarter of a mile away, and it was like, for me, because I'm old school, I went, "Oh no," and he went, and he just sort of penciled it out. And
seriously,
he took enough out of it to just make it something else. It was pixels really anyway, but you could see that they were actually having a sandwich in the car. But yeah, so all those issues which used to be catastrophic and that were opticals. I don't know if you remember, if you're old enough to, if you can see opticals in old films, because literally the quality of the film, degrades 20% and then comes back again when the optical is finished. But that simply doesn't happen anymore. Ugh.
Well, that's a roundabout way of me saying that's when I first came across you, hearing you talk. I mean, obviously I'd seen your films. I'd seen Eden Lake well before I'd seen you speak. And today we're going to talk about 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. But before we do that, we want to talk about a new project you're involved with, which is kind of adjacent to film. It's audio, isn't it? Is what we're doing. And
it is. And I just wanted to stress that, my day job is producing, and I'm producing something, developing something with the BFI, producing something with Film 4, all of which takes up my day. But I've always been a sort of maker. I've always done stuff with my hands, mostly repairing. And if I'm being very honest, mostly not true, as in not straight and at right angles, like sheds, which aren't quite true. But I've always enjoyed making stuff. And during lockdown, I did that typical thing of, growing my beard and learning how to make bread and learning how to sew and all these things as it staggered on. And one of the projects was sort of thrust on me, which is my daughter was at Manchester doing music, and she came back in her second year and she was absolutely flying. She was destined to get a first. And all of a sudden she was sort of thrown out of university with all sorts of projects to deliver. And she's a singer-songwriter. And so I built her, as I build people things, a little, I call it a little, she hated it because it was so big, but a booth that was made out of the plywood, acoustic foam and packing blankets, in which she could put a laptop and a microphone and do her project. And it worked in principle. In other words, it killed reverb and it made it sound decent. Yeah. But she absolutely hated it because it was smelly and it was, she didn't have a very big room and it just took over the room. So it was used, but resentfully. And it went into a skip, when she went back to university. So I forgot about it really. And then my son, sounds like, the Von Trapps here. My son he's a BBC Radio 4 comedy producer now, but he's also a comedian. And he did that thing. Bless him. He actually did it. He went, well, I'm going to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. So I'm going to suck at home. And he actually wrote a book, it's extraordinary really. And my wife, who's an actress, said, if the book turns into something that's readable, I'll read it. So I built another booth for her, and I didn't want to build a big smelly one. So I built one out of acoustic foam, which is that very brightly coloured closed cell foam, which again really works. And I've got the sort of 2 centimetre versions or 2.5. So, I built another version of the box, but this one I realised that if I cut it a clever way and taped it a certain way, I didn't have to keep it as a box. It would kind of fold in on itself like a concertina.
Okay.
And my wife used it and she hated it as well because it was really wobbly and it also smelled of chemicals. So it was a limited duration. You could stay in it. But again, the principle worked. But I just couldn't get the hinges right and it smelled and everything. So again, I put that away. And it was just sort of a thing Dad had made once or twice during the lockdown period. And the sort of eureka moment for me, and it's the same in film when you kind of get over a story problem or a financing problem, whatever it might be, it all starts to come together, is one of my oldest friends, a man I've known over 50 years, as well as being an artist and a furniture maker and everything. He is a internationally known interior designer for offices. Oh, wow. So Google, Microsoft, that sort of stuff. And I went to visit him and he'd made this window blind out of this amazing stuff called PET felt, which is a felt, but made out of plastic bottles, 60% plastic bottles. Oh, and it's kind of it looks like a thick felt, but it's incredibly rigid and it's acoustic and you can cut it really cleanly, but you can't tear it. Anyway, it was like, Nick, what is that? And he told me what it was and how to do it. And he introduced me to this company. And so I remade my third box with all these kind of cuts and it didn't smell. And it was incredibly effective at killing reverb. I'm in one now on a mobile phone, and I think you'll agree it's a dry sound.
No, it's lovely.
Yeah, and it also has a pretty profound influence on decibel noise as well. So anyway, I went into prototyping and I made a bunch of them, and that's where we are now. So we just launched the Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. If you look up VOX BOX on Kickstarter, and our social media handles are @VOX BOX Portable, because that's what it is. It won't be better than what you have set up there, Stuart, because you've got a permanent setup. But if you're either starting out or you're forced by living in where most people live in small places with other people, that people don't want to sacrifice the sofa or the duvets or the kitchen table, it pops up in 15 seconds, it collapses in 5 seconds, and it'll go behind a door, and it'll go into the boot of a car. So if you ever had to do one of these, caught short and you're remotely located, and you're going to be in a hotel, if you put one in your car, it will at least sound dry and consistent. You know what I mean? So it has utility, and that's why I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know plenty of actors who during lockdown, voiceover and reading books and things like that became something they could do at home, because COVID meant they were stuck indoors, but record their voice, and then they were improvising with what they could, do, like you say, duvets is often a, and it's not comfortable when it's hot to be sat under a duvet for hours at a time. And
that was my kind of parallel inspiration. My wife, used to love Twitter, and it was a big thing for her during lockdown, a way of communicating. And she built up a substantial following, like 45,000 followers. And one day she said to me, "Have you seen these?" And she started showing me pictures of, actors, performers, podcasters, journalists under the duvet or in a sofa cushion studio that they built, on a kitchen table. And I thought, well, actually, this is actually a problem that I could, if I could get this bloody thing right, I could get into a solution. So that was the other side. And it has been very interesting that the people so far who've pledged on Kickstarter, most of them I don't know, but most of them are the profile that I first saw in lockdown of people just going, I don't want to have duvet head anymore. I don't want to be, airless. I just want something that works, but I can't afford, or I don't want to sacrifice, a permanent part of my house to it.
So when people go to the Kickstarter, what is it? Is it a straightforward purchase, or is there kind of degrees of purchasing?
Kickstarter runs on a thing called a pledge.
Okay.
So you'll see my lovely face pitching you my box.
Yeah.
And there's other support videos and stuff. And then there's an option of they call it pledging. So you can buy for a discount to retail price, of course, because it's Kickstarter. You can pledge to buy a VOX box, and your pledge will only be called, as in cashed, when I've raised my full amount, which is an ambitious 45 grand, and I'm sort of 18% through it now after just a week and a bit.
Okay.
So it's only if I raise my capital through the pledges that your money will be called, and if it is, then I can go into production. I've got a minimum order quantity. In order to make it for the price, I've got to order 500, and that's expensive. So that's why I need to raise the capital. Yeah. So, and then if it works, then you'll be getting your VOX box in sort of late November, before Christmas is my rational ambition.
And we're recording this Wednesday, 26th of July. So 2023. So what's the closing date for the Kickstarter?
It's the end of August.
End of August. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for having me, because it's weird. I'm 60 years old. And I've been a film producer all my adult life, really, all my working life at least. It's very odd that something that, still a hobby. It's what I do on the evenings and weekends and early mornings sometimes. But, it's to turn something which is actually turned into a product. And there was a moment with my friend Nick who advised me when, because he is a designer, and he went, it's now a product, Richard. And it was so exciting. It's like when to bring it back to film, it's like when you're developing, and all of a sudden you kind of think, I can send this out. I can send the script out, and people will read it as if it's not the first draft or the third draft. You can see it being made. It's a lovely feeling.
But also it plays to the type of the producer, which is the idea of the problem solver. And it was like it may not have been films you were solving, but you saw a problem, and your instinct was to try and solve it. Obviously it starts with your daughter's journey, but obviously then it becomes something more that you're wrestling with.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a lot of similarities in terms of any kind of building, making, and filmmaking. I've done parallels before, but they're definitely there. I think the unique thing about this, and what's so weird for me, is I've got this late stage prototype that I'm in now, showing you. It's a pretty good prototype. I went to the podcast show and I put it up and down 200 times over 2 days. And I've had the hinges tested by Intertech, so it's a very durable thing, but it's a thing. And that's so weird, film, you do have a script, which is a thing, but it's completely intangible till the moment that you sort of, run off your fair copy and screen it. And to be able to show people, say, look at this, take that out of a bag and pop it up and then put it away. I can't tell you the difference in that emotion that it conjures, because I've made a thing. So for me, again, at the age of 60, to go from being sort of an intellectual property person to being a product designer, I'm not really, but having designed a product is very different.
No, congratulations! I think it's interesting to have heard the journey, because there's one thing to go, I'm going to build a thing that's going to help people get better acoustics, but actually there was a genuine evolution where it was just I was thinking about a specific problem, but then it grew into, actually, no, there's a wider application for this.
There is a wider, and I now think there's a market, because since we launched the Kickstarter, I've had 2 retail, sort of DJ type suppliers, sound supplies, coming to me, and I've had CNN said, this very nice guy I met at the podcast show, he literally stopped me and went, do that again, and he put his head in. He went, oh wow. He went, my boss in New York is making this right now out of hexagon squares, and it's smelly and it doesn't work. And this is exactly what we need. And, Lewis Goodall at LBC was just, he came over and again popped it up for him, and he went, Tom, my producer, Tom, come on. This is exactly what we need when we travel. So, the vaulting ambition, Stuart, is that I love my customers, obviously, and my customers are my customers. But what I need is sort of corporations to go, we should have some of those in stock, or, educational establishments, NHS, people giving.
Well, I was just thinking of your film junket. I mean, when I do them now, obviously a lot more are remote, and the actor or the director is just talking to me on a laptop or a phone. And if you could send them out an acoustic box and get them something towards a better recording quality without them needing to get all kinds of microphones and whatnot, then
and baffles and stuff like that. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other one is like events, that if you've ever been into like the press office or the press tent at festivals or events, they're just a nightmare for sound because it's so intense. But, if you put your head in here, it just makes it feasible. It gives the person on the other end at least the sort of the basic track to do something with, rather than a nightmare where you have to, slice and dice the top off and the bottom off.
Indeed. Well, look, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Very nice of you.
And we shall move swiftly along into 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. Now, that sounds very dramatic. It is more about sort of fond memories with film. I mean, and obviously the list could have, I'm guessing the list could have extended well beyond 3 in terms of, as for someone who's been working in film for as long as you have. There has to be a love for the media for you to work in it that long, I think.
Yeah.
Richard has given me 3 films, and we're going to talk about each of those films for 5 minutes. And when 5 minutes are up, we will hear this sound. That all coming through at your end, okay?
Yeah, very good.
Without further ado, then, let us jump into your first choice. I'm going to do them in the order you gave them me. So, First off is 1978 even, The Last Waltz.
Yes. So I am 60. So when I was a kid and started to watch films, you watch films in the cinema and then they vanished for 2 or 3 years, and then they came on at Christmas and they were played maybe once or twice. And that was it. I mean, the BFI were running cultural classics, and yes, as were some cinemas, but basically the film vanished. And then video came along. And what was exciting about that, I'll get to, but video came along as a fist fight between VHS and Beta. And the way that they got you is they said, buy this machine and we'll give you 2 films. So we went down the shops and we bought a VHS, and it came back with MASH and The Last Waltz. And MASH is, it was so extraordinary. I watched both films. I try not to exaggerate, at least 50 times each, because I could. It was so exciting to finish the film and then rewind it and watch it again. Then go, I'll watch the left-hand side of the screen, and now I'll watch the top right-hand corner. You could really get into it. I think MASH is a flawed film now. It's very, very dated, but it was funny and I loved it. But The Last Waltz was the first documentary I'd really ever been conscious of.
Okay.
B, directed by Martin Scorsese. Has he done any other documentaries? I don't know, but it was a great piece of filmmaking. And C had, it was musical. And I'm not a big muso, but I like my music. And I'd never heard of the band. So it's the documentary is Scorsese following the band on their sort of last set of concerts before they, unfortunately, before some of them started killing themselves and, went completely nuts. But they were running out of speed. And so everyone they'd ever backed and everyone they'd ever admired or admired them came to play. And there's one particular song, which is, my funeral song, which I won't know whether my wife ever actually agrees to play it, but is The Weight by the band.
Yeah.
And the unique, so I would say it's not just The Last Waltz. It is this particular song. It's The Weight with backing from the Staple Singers. And it still makes the hairs on my forearm stand up. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's a very weird song. I mean, because I'm so into it, I've looked at the lyrics, and it's slightly biblical, and it's slightly sort of classical references, and it's a fractured narrative, an unreliable narrator, all these things in a what is a pretty little song. But the singers, the band all take a verse, and then the lead Staple sister, whose name I remember but I don't, she takes a verse as well, and the male Staple singer takes a verse. And at the end of the whole thing, she leans forward and says, very quietly into the mic to Robbie Robertson, the lead guitarist and singer, and she just goes, beautiful. Just a little whisper, and it just makes me go every time. So if you get the opportunity, go onto YouTube and just look up The Wait, Staple Sisters singing. It's just marvellous. So that was my first one. I've undercooked.
Just remember, so you weren't into the band when you got hold of this documentary. So that's in. I mean, that speaks to a time when that idea of just being able to choose to watch something. I mean, it's something I vividly remember. Of like, we watched Jaws at a friend's house. That was my first VHS experience, and we did exactly what you said. Let's watch it again then.
Yeah.
And and nobody could stop us. We'd watch Top of the Pops that we'd recorded off the TV on a Friday, which blew my tiny mind. The idea that Thursday 7:00 could now be any time you want if you recorded the Thursday 7:00.
Yeah.
So why remind me? So why are you choosing a documentary that you didn't know?
I suppose because it represents a moment in time. It was really two films, that all of a sudden you could realise that you could watch them again and again, and you could become your own kind of analyst of film narrative and and photography and pace and editing, and you could also kind of you had the opportunity to really delve and get into the film. So I suppose it's that particular film because it was the first time I was aware of documentary. And how I thought, well, that's just, documentary is like, Crime Watch, isn't it? I didn't realize that it had its own structure and form and emotion, and it could, and the hooks. There's one other great moment where Neil Young, who's in terrible trouble, obviously at this point, deep into heroin, and he comes out and he does not look well, and he's tuning up for his track.
Finish it off.
And he's and he starts tuning up for his guitar, and it's not plugged in, and the band just sort of go, oh my god, we've sort of left him naked, and a roadie comes on and shoves in the thing, and he starts playing, and he leans forward into camera, and he turns to Robbie Robertson, and he goes, they've got it now, Robbie. My family's.
Are you ready to launch your career to new heights? Visit careers.dish.com/technician now and uncover a world of exciting opportunities waiting just for you. From cutting-edge technology to a supportive work environment, Dish has everything you need to thrive. Don't wait any longer to kickstart your next opportunity. Apply today and join the Dish family where innovation meets opportunity. Visit us online at careers.dish.com/technician. Your future starts now.
Still use that line if someone repairs a problem. They've got it now, Robbie. And it's so sinister. But yeah, it's a great film and I love it.
I mean, and also what's interesting for the documentary form is there's an event. So there's a narrative to the event. And then there's the documentary, which is these talking heads.
Yeah.
That have obviously been the timeline's been messed with because it's obviously what Martin Scorsese got.
Yeah.
And it's almost, and if you think about, 1978, we're not far off MTV being launched. So then we've got this predates.
And punk is raging.
Yeah.
These guys are so dinosaurs.
But it also predates the idea of the music video. But you've got Martin Scorsese, one of the greatest directors, making a feature length music
and obviously with at least 5 or 6 cameras. I mean, it's beautifully covered. It really is beautifully covered and beautifully mixed as well.
Right then, moving swiftly into the 90s. For a very different tone whatsoever. Your words, not mine. We've got Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Tell us where this. I mean, this is a very different film than Last Waltz. So, Why or where does this fit in your film memory? What is it that got you?
Okay, so I was in town between meetings in Leicester Square, or near Leicester Square, and I thought, actually, I've got just enough time to see a film if I can, because I was on the 2:00 transition period, and there was either Police Academy 6, I think, or this thing called Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, and all I'd seen was the posters, and it wasn't big posters, it was like kind of a sort of dirty, quick and dirty posters that had been put up of this guy with a weird hair who I'd never heard of. And I thought, do you know what? I don't think I can face Police Academy. So I'm going to take a risk. I very rarely leave films, frankly, but I'll take a risk on Ace Ventura. And it started. And I have to say, I was laughing so hard within 15 seconds that I was out of control. I just couldn't believe how funny this opening was, which I won't ruin for you. It is worth seeing. It's Jim Carrey, pure genius. Because nothing happens. It's just wonderful. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And then I got hold of it, and I used to watch it with my son just all the time. And it was I tried to introduce him to films, like things I think I mentioned, like Harold and Maude, and he'd just gone, I don't get this at all. So we used to watch, again, Ace Ventura on a loop, and we knew all the lines, and, it inspired him to, he's now a comedian, and he works for BBC Comedy as a producer on the radio. It was a really formative film for me because, I like making comedies. I made things like Shooting Fish and Waking Ned. I think I'm a good audience. I'm an easy laugh.
Yeah.
But it showed me that a very simple idea, well executed with a fantastic comedic performance, could absolutely enchant and capture an audience who vocalize their appreciation. So I just absolutely loved it for that. And it was and it's kind of a family film for me, for my family.
And I'm guessing, that was Jim Carrey's breakout, wasn't it? That was his.
It was. And by the way, the film itself is pretty terrible. The last act is it can only be called transphobic. It's just, that all the jokes are at the expense of a trans person. So please don't watch this and hate me. Just watch the opening act, maybe the second act, where it starts getting a little bit difficult. But the opening act is just genius because the character is so unpleasant. Ace Ventura is such an idiot and opinionated. He's not an idiot. It's actually obviously a genius, but he's opinionated and it's just what we would call an arse, but absolutely mesmeric.
Now, you said you're in between meetings, so you're in London watching this film.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember what cinema you saw it at?
I think it was at the Empire, or the one that's now View, before it broke up into a million.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, could you, we're talking nearly 30 years now, 29 years since, can you think about how much the cinema landscape has changed from then to now?
For me, going to the cinema was always, I go a lot on my own.
Yeah.
My wife's married to someone who's not particularly keen on films or the experience of going to the cinema. So I used to go on my own lot anyway. The landscape, I suppose, has changed by there being a sort of terrifying amount of choice, but now a sort of, a shrinking screen number. So, I am generally a very optimistic person, but I am pretty terrified at what the sort of medium term holds for the cinema experience. And, I've been to see Barbie. I'm going to see Oppenheimer. Even I am being affected by it. I'm sort of not going to as many films as I did because, I've got a pretty nice screen. I've got pretty nice sound at home. Don't have to deal with people chatting, or sort of an unpredictable experience. So, the landscape has changed utterly, and I think it's in for more changes as well.
I've recently discovered the Garden Cinema by Holden Tube. I don't know if you've ventured there yet.
I've seen it, but I haven't been in.
It's this beautiful Art Deco cinema where it is just for the love of film. There is no phone use. There is no chattering. And for a cinema that's in the centre of London, on most days, they do a £5 matinee, which is the absolute future. I can't believe it. I've seen films that have played at Cannes Film Festival for a £5 in the centre of London, which is...
Yeah.
And the last one I saw there was I saw Strange on a Train.
The Prince Charles, bless it, is the one kind of funky one in town that does sort of weird, as we know, weird programming and obsessive programming, which is, again, I think most filmmakers are slightly obsessive about one or two films in their life, which they'll have watched dozens of times. And I think that's very valuable. I tried to get into film school and they wouldn't I'm not blaming them, but they didn't let me in because I just didn't fit in. But before, had that happened at an earlier era, I suspect I would never have really learned anything. But the ability to watch films again allowed all of us to sort of work out what we liked and why, and if you really got into it, sort of, because I used to think, what do you mean by shot selection, or what do you mean by lenses, or the different focal lengths and all sorts of stuff? How does that? And then I watch it a few times and go, yeah, I see what they're saying. That bringing someone in and out of focus, or a depth of field or stuff, does have a very different emotional impact. And I think that's what I loved about VHS and then digital.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience. I got quietly obsessed with Nicholas Winding Refn's Only God Forgives, and I couldn't. I mean, because it's a short film, but it's still a slow film to most people's minds, and it's the one that followed Drive, which was this cooler than now film and everything.
Yeah,
and I couldn't work out or understand why I was so drawn to it. And then you look to the credits and everything, and it's the DOP's Larry Smith, and Larry Smith did Eyes Wide Shut. Larry Smith consulted on The Shining. And you go, oh, that's why it's more or less Kubrickian, almost like, in a way. And that's not an accident, because then I look back over Winding Refn's filmography, and he's used Larry Smith regularly in his work. So you kind of go, oh, right. So there's something in how something is shot in terms of a subjective response to you as the viewer, as much as there is the language of film.
Yeah, and that language of film becomes a kind of, if you like, a sort of common language, like almost like a dialect that wheels speak, and we don't quite know, we don't understand it, but it starts to look odd if it's not there. And then every now and again a filmmaker will come along that sort of bumps it forward a bit by use of some technique or style, and then that again becomes part of the film language. And that's why some old films, narratively they just don't hold water, because they don't feel right. Somehow we've moved on from not just the storytelling or the attitudes or whatever, but it's just the filmmaking technique just doesn't hold.
Right then, this feels like a meta choice as much as it's probably one new to you as a producer. We're winding back in time to 1967 to Mel Brooks.
Oh no, we're not. You're going to hate me. I'm going forward to the musical.
Oh right, the actual.
Yeah, but I will reference obviously the original. The original Zero Mostel version is I can say Gene Hackman, I don't mean Gene Wilder version. It's still, again, right up there in the pantheon of my favourite films, and just wonderful. And the central premise as a producer is just so awful and wonderful at the same time. This idea that you'll just raise more than you need to make it, and it'll be so bad no one will think about the returns. It's just genius, and it must have been so exciting for him, Mel Brooks, to come up with that. And I loved it, and I've seen the original producers time and time again, and it's wonderful. The reason I chose the musical is for a number of reasons. Again, it's coming down to family mainly, but I hugely admire Mel Brooks. Kind of thinking, I wonder actually if there's a musical structure in here, and I don't know anything about musicals other than there's a kind of form. It's like kabuki theatre, really. You need so many songs, and if your character has more than a certain impact on the story, they'll need their song or their song and a half, or there's have to be a duet, and I just think it feels to me as an outsider anyway a perfectly structured musical. It's also incredibly funny. I mean, it's just got some of the best lines, some of which are in both, but I don't know if you remember it, that one says, why don't you like actors or something? And he goes, have you ever eaten with one? And my wife's an actress. It's a mad lie. It doesn't mean anything other than it's just really funny, Anyway, I watch that film at least 3 or 4 times a year. My wife watches it twice a year, on her birthday and on Mother's Day, with more than one bottle of wine. And then we probably as a family watch it 2 other times, sort of, festivals, festivities. And it lit, I sometimes think, oh, I don't need to watch that bit. And as soon as it starts, I don't move. It's just, I think, wonderful. Plus it has a sort of a really deep thing to say about friendship. And I don't think it's just male friendship. I think it's about friendship. It's about that idea of finding someone and committing to them and seeing it through. And, whilst what they're doing is very nefarious and, unfair on everyone that they rip off, they're still done, like the original, with such charm and wit. And, you so badly want him to succeed, Nathan. You just want it to work out for him once, and then he'll do the right thing. And it's sort of in the end he does. He, having paid his dues, that last wonderful shot as you see his next productions going off in neon into the darkness down Broadway. He obviously starts being a successful producer again. So anyway, for all those reasons, I just absolutely love it.
But interesting then, you choosing the musical over the film I know you've talked about the film there, but so what do you think? Because usually it's the way around. Usually the successful musical gets adapted to the big screen. That's kind of the route we go. Not. I mean, it has happened. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is a unique experience, but usually the trajectory is we start off on Broadway, then we go around the world selling the film to everybody. Whereas this has gone. This went. So is it 2001? I think Broadway was the original Broadway.
Yeah, I've never seen it on stage, by the way. I'm not very interested in musicals.
Okay.
In theatre, it's just the film. I remember hearing about it when it was to be a musical. I thought, oh God, really? That feels like you're sort of trying to mine something. So I didn't see it. I sort of rejected it, and I was not keen on watching the filmed version of the musical. But it's perfect. It is a perfect film.
I mean, and as you've mentioned it already, Prince Charles obviously play this. You can go to a sing along for the producers.
And the music, both the sort of the original Springtime for Hitler tunes, of course, is in there. But the musical numbers are that all I do know about musicals is the kind of trope or cliche where you sing because you can't go anywhere else, and he absolutely sticks to that rule. And so you're never, ever thinking, why are they singing? And what they sing is just incredibly witty. And the tunes are good. The tunes you remember. It's just great.
I mean, interestingly, John August and Craig Mazan, who do the Script Notes podcast, I don't know if you've listened to that before, they're big fans of the musical. And John August actually adapted his film Big Fish to become a musical. He worked on the adaptation from film to thingy. And they talk a lot about the musical form from a screenwriting point of view and how, the songs are there for the I am me moment, this is me moment and all that, which you couldn't do in normal drama because the song allows you that leeway to be, I mean, for want of expression, on the nose.
Yes.
But it doesn't, but that doesn't, in a good musical, that doesn't detract from the storytelling. It's part of the form.
Yeah. And I'm now sort of slightly inside the camp because I made a film called Waking Ned about 25 years ago, which did well in America significantly. And that's now been a long, long, long journey, but that's now with as Matthew Broderick will say, a Broadway producer who is turning it into a musical. And I can see it, in my mind's eye. It does have, I think the ones that adapt well is they have sort of, great moments that you can, make into a theatrically dramatic form. But they have to have a big theme. And I think Waking Ned's big theme is about dignity.
Yeah.
It's about a community that is, on its legs and run out of, everyone's old and, it's starting to sort of fall away. And what their, again, nefarious act gives them as a community is sort of collective dignity. And I think that will therefore sustain people's hook, some emotional interest in that if and when it ever makes it onto the stage.
Now, this may seem like a crass comparison, but it's only because she's been on my podcast. I was looking up to interview Julie Ducournau about Titane, which you might not think there's a segue between that and musicals. But when I interviewed her, when I rewatched the film, because I was trying to think, I'm doing the junket, I need to think of some angle to make this interview interesting. And I realised that the first song and the last song were the same, but in two completely different styles.
Okay.
And then I charted all the songs that are in the film, and I realised, from me as a subjective viewer, not objective truth, like, hold on a minute, these songs are all describing the metamorphosis of the character. So I presented that to her as my hypothesis. A big gamble, obviously, because she should have gone, no, they were just what we could afford in post, so that's the songs we got. I could easily have made that mistake. And she went, yeah, you're right, because I wrote every song in the screenplay because I needed the lyrics to do some heavy lifting.
Right.
Which I know would be a producer's nightmare. And she said that herself. You say, I want Future Islands in my screen in the film. Going, yeah, right. We'll see if we can.
Yeah. No, and I think actually I saw that film in the cinema, and it's just kind of hackneyed expression, but I was literally blown away. I think two or three times out loud, I went, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
And again, talking about producer's nightmare. Yes, not only prescriptive need for certain IP, songs, but also moments where I can see in development, if there was any development, that someone going, do you think we could just, there's lots of moments of kind of like, oh my goodness, I think it's an amazing piece of work. I didn't even really like it. You know what I mean? It was one of the things I found deeply uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop recommending. Just an amazing piece of work.
Absolutely. Well, look, that brings us to the end of your 3 films that have impacted everything in adult life. Thank you for sharing some great stories there. Do you want to just quickly remind people then? So VOX BOX is, and I'm recording this now on the 26th of July, and we're closing when on the Kickstarter?
End of August. The things to, if you want to know more, as in quite a lot more about my unit, my VOX BOX, it's on, it's voxbox.studio is the website where everything's on. If you want to just have a look at the, whether you're interested in buying it, it's on Kickstarter. You just type in VOX BOX and you'll get to.
Well, like I said, I'll put a link directly to the page to make life easier for people when they're listening to this podcast. Any film news you're able to share? Anything in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of interesting things, which both are in the public domain, so that's all right. I've got a film I'm developing with the BFI, which has got Ben Wheatley EPing, and it's from Gareth Tunley, who did The Ghoul, so BAFTA-nominated, BIFA-nominated filmmaker, and the nicest human being in the world.
Indeed,
so
a past guest. We talked about The Ghoul on the podcast when it came out.
Oh, good. He's just wonderful. And so that's called The Unravelling. And we're looking to set that up for first quarter next year. And again, this is in public. Yes, I'm developing with Film 4 a film called The 3 Degrees, which is about the 3 footballers who joined West Bromwich Albion in the 78-79 season, which is Laurie Cunningham, Brendan Batson, and Cyril Regis. And it's being directed by Clint Dyer and written by Roy Williams, OBE, who's just the most amazing playwright and screenwriter, and executive produced by Lenny Henry. What we're trying to do there is tell an entertaining, Roy is a funny guy, Clint is a funny man, Lenny is a funny guy, an entertaining story, but what it was really like for those 3 very young men, they're all in their 20s or very early 20s, to be, through serendipity, they just find themselves in a very difficult place, Smethwick at that point for a person of colour. And they were these men were not social warriors. They weren't there to sort of, to try and change things. They just wanted to play football. And that's kind of what they came to. They realised that their only way of survival was to win. And they did. And it's a very funny, very fast pace of social change narrative film. It's not really a football film, although it's got some fantastic football in it. It's just about those 3 remarkable men and what they endured with such grace.
I live right by Leighton Orient football ground, and as I come out of my door, to my left is a statue of Laurie Cunningham that was erected. I didn't know this till the statue was erected. The first British player to play for Real Madrid, but the first black player to play for England, which is amazing.
Well, Cyril was, I think, the first black player to play for the under-23s, I think, and it was announced, and the next day he got a bullet in the post with a cut out letters saying, "If you step onto Wembley, we'll put one in your knee."
Yeah, I mean, this is the bit I've still trying to put myself, and it's horrifying to
horrifying, and there's still a lot of racism in football, as we know, and I'm not trying to sort of we're not. This film does not try to change the world, but what they endured was, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people from their own side and from the opposing side, screaming at them and Sieg-heiling and throwing bananas at them, en masse. It is different now and still horrible. But what they endured was like the wall of sound. And there's some fantastic moments of them in the tunnel coming out where they're just looking at each other going, just let's stick together, play the game, win, and we might be all right. They were under a lot of physical pressure.
Well, look, best of luck with that. Sounds amazing. Sounds like something I'd love to see. Best of luck with VOX BOX. And it just gives me to say thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Come on and put me in a loving shoe and let me rock you like you want me to, 'cause now the boots are clean and we've had our fill. You put on the coat and I'll get the bill. This is a love story and I'm singing to you. Me and my baby loving in the rockin' shoe. Come on and put me in a loving shoe, yeah. And let me rock you like you want me to, yeah.
Prime Day is coming July 16th and 17th. With epic deals exclusively for Prime members, you'll feel like you just won an award.
Oh, wow, I didn't even prepare a speech. I'd like to thank my family for always needing stuff. Also, Sam, my delivery guy, for bringing all my awesome deals so fast. You're the man, Sam!
Shop deals on electronics, home, and more this Prime Day, July 16th and 17th.